Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Braden Banglin, and I'm a senior studying political science and data science at the University of Kansas. Having been involved with the Dole Institute and its amazing student advisory board since my freshman year, I've had great experiences here through events and programs on complex political issues, the importance of bipartisanship, and how to work and advocate for issues one cares about at the local and state level. Moreover, the Dole Student Advisory Board offers many opportunities for KU students. This past October, senior student workers such as myself and senior members of the advisory board were able to meet with various policy centers and go on an all-expenses-paid trip in Washington, D.C. Moreover, we got to meet our student counterparts at Georgetown University's Institute of Politics. In addition, I am very proud to serve as the Institute's discussion group coordinator, my second year in this position. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members can access many great opportunities through their involvement at the Dole Institute, including volunteering at programs, networking with our special guests, and professional development opportunities here. If you are a student and would like to join the Student Advisory Board, please email us at dolesab@ku.edu or simply speak with a student worker like myself after the program. A video of today's program will be available on our YouTube channel. You can also access videos of past programs by visiting our YouTube channel. A loop hearing system is available to use if you have a T-coil hearing aid. We also have a limited number of listening devices. If you have questions about the loop system at any time during the program or have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members in the back. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you are able and ask just one brief question. If you are part of our virtual audience this evening, you may submit your questions at dolequestions@ku.edu. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your question with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all of you to please turn your cell phones off as well. Now please join me in welcoming Dole Fellows Sherry Bustos and Luke Messer.
Thank you, Braden. Appreciate it. Should we jump right into it?
Yeah,
right.
So I think a lot of you we've met before, but it's probably at least worth saying for those that weren't necessarily here before who we are, just in 30 seconds or so. I'm Luke Messer, a former a whole bunch of things, but most relevant to this group, a former member of Congress that served Indiana's 6th Congressional District, and a colleague of Representative Bustos, who we served together for the entire 6 years I was there.
Yeah, and I'm Sherry Bustos. I'm from the state of Illinois, actually the far northwest corner of the state of Illinois. If you can picture where Iowa and Illinois and Wisconsin come together, that is the congressional district that I represented and also where I live. I live in a small town, 3,500 people, come from a long line of family farmers. The district that I represented for 10 years, so for 5 terms. Luke and I were both elected in 2012, and so we served together for the 6 years that he was in, and then I was in for another couple terms after that. But we have the world headquarters for John Deere. We have the world headquarters for Caterpillar before they moved to Texas, by the way. But a lot of blue-collar workers. Skews more to not college educated. I was in a Trump district, although I am a Democrat. Luke is a Republican, so to the point of the bipartisanship of the Dole Institute and stressing that, we get along well, we like each other, we did when we served together, we still do.
Yeah, exactly. And then I just want to say thank you to the Dole Institute. We both want to say thank you. It's an extraordinary opportunity. I mean, not only is the legacy of Bob and Elizabeth Dole something that's going to stand throughout the history of our nation, but the more I've learned about this institute and what it's about, and trying to help us figure out how we make this crazy democratic republic of ours work is important. And so we're excited to be here and play our own little small contribution to that. We've also had a chance to spend some time with your extraordinary students here, and I can just tell you we're impressed. I mean, they're bright people, earnest, and there's a lot to be proud of here. You know, we've been asked to sort of talk about campaign finance. I would say we'll have a question and answer session at the end. You know, Sherry and I like to talk and interact, so I would say this, like if we say something and you just can't help yourself at that moment and you want to ask a question, just try to raise your hand. We'll try to, even in the middle of this conversation, answer that, because, you know, frankly, it's that dialogue that I think makes us all better. So with that, I will start with the first question to you, and then we'll turn back in.
Sounds good. 6 days out, by the way, right?
Yeah.
Who's voted early? Oh, almost all of you. Look at that.
I have to admit, like, one of my favorite things is getting up way too early on Election Day and seeing everybody there. So I applaud you for voting early, but I'm kind of the traditionalist in that way.
Who's voting on Election Day? Okay, yeah.
Be doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's our first question and topic, and let's get
ready,
going.
Luke.
How have you seen the role of money evolve in campaigns, and what novelties have you noticed in recent elections?
All right, so also for context, I ran the political arm of House Democrats. So it's called the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I ran it in the 20 cycle. So Democrats won back the majority in 2018. So my job, and I was elected among my colleagues, my job was to hang on to what I always called a fragile majority. Because in 2018, the seats that Democrats picked up, they picked up many of them by 5 points or fewer. So it was, you know, and in some cases, they were in Republican districts, so Democrats and Trump districts. And so we were able to do that. We did not grow our majority. We did hang on to it. But that said, in that cycle, we raised $333 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obscene. And I think probably worth noting is Citizens United changed things a lot. And we should talk a little bit about that, about dark money. For Democrats, we were ahead of the ball game, and Republicans now have, you've got your own method, but we had what's called Act Blue. For any Democrats who have ever donated, especially like the smaller amounts, if you click on, when somebody sends you a link, you can click here. It's called Act Blue. So, but a lot of that is the lower dollar donations. That has really taken off and has really changed things for the PACs, the political action committees. I was a founding board member of a political action committee called Elect Democratic Women, EDW, and we have raised $30 million since the 2018 cycle, and most of that is by small dollar donations. So think about that. So I would say, Luke, I mean, here are my initial thoughts. Small dollar donations have really taken off. Mm-hmm. The online fundraising, you know, the appeals for anybody who's ever given. My husband doesn't give too much out of his own pockets, but he has given to a couple people, and he's now inundated by texts and emails. And I said, once you give, that's what happens. So small dollar donations, Citizens United, where you've got the dark money, has really changed things, I think, for the worse. And the races are just obscenely expensive.
They are.
Yeah.
So a couple thoughts for context that may be provocative, but provocative doesn't make them not true. Money's always been a part of politics. Yeah. Right? It has been for a really long time. I still pretty sure, at least the number as of until the last cycle, we spend more money on Halloween on candy than we spend on our federal election campaigns. Important to realize for perspective. And if it's and if we passed it, it's still pretty close. Okay. Now, again, that doesn't say. I think as we saw with Citizens United, which was a response to the McCain-Feingold bill, efforts to legislatively somehow fix this often end up to have unintended consequences, right? Like the legislation that was brought forward led to a Supreme Court decision, which then really, frankly, opened up the coffers to all kinds of money. And I was with some high school students earlier this week where I kind of just made the point and asked, you know, if we took money out of politics, which group of Americans do you think that would most benefit when it came to running for office? Like, who would benefit the most from having no money in politics? Celebrities.
Oh.
Because if you're already famous, you're going to have an enormous advantage over other people who aren't famous. So get ready for athletes and actors and
local weatherman
local,
who is in the seat. Seriously, out of the seat that I didn't run for re-election, but the guy who won a crowded Democratic primary was a weatherman for 20 years in 2 of the 4 media markets.
Car salesman.
So
car
to that
salesmen
point.
who've been running advertisements over the last. I mean, this would be. So again, I say all that to say that doesn't mean it's hopeless or we should do nothing. I'm just saying, like, it's not as easy to fix as we might describe. Let's talk about some of the changes, even in a time since, like, when Sherry and I first came to office, would have been sort of the last of the old way of doing it. Okay, well, and I say old as in what it was like in the late teens and like after 2000, like in that 10 or 15 years. In that 10 or 15 years, to win in an election for Congress, for example, you needed to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. You didn't necessarily have to raise millions of dollars, and you would do that by having friends or family and neighbors, and you'd raise in increments of $250 and $500, and maybe somebody wrote you a $100 check. I remember my daughters were pretty young, and I guess this may sound a little scarring, but they like saved some money when I was running for Congress and gave me a $5 campaign contribution because they heard so much about campaign, because that's what you had to do, right? And you would piece that together in a big sort of if somebody had been in Sherry's role at that time and they would say, okay, who are we going to get as a candidate? Are they the kind of person who would be like a Barbara, who like would know a lot of people and would have the ability to do that? Sometime in the last 6 years or so, that's almost gone away to where the key is now, do you have some connection to some special interest group who would find you to be particularly interesting and they're willing to like just write a $500,000 check?
Or are you personally wealthy?
As another group.
And
right?
Here's the thing about that scenario. So the governor of Illinois is a guy named J.B. Pritzker. They are from the Hyatt fortune. And there are many members of the Pritzker family. They are all billionaires. So our governor is a billionaire. He ran, when he was running for governor, I was looking at running for governor in Illinois. And we knew our lineup was going to be J.B. Pritzker, a billionaire from the Hyatt fortune, Chris Kennedy of the Kennedy fortune. Robert Kennedy's a son who's not RFK Jr. But Chris is from Illinois. He was running for governor. And then I was looking at it. And so we did some polling. And my husband was the sheriff of our county. I was a journalist and worked in healthcare before I went to Congress. We do not have personal wealth. And I was looking at it, and our polling showed that I had a path to victory if I could define myself before my opponents could define me.
But how do you get defined?
And you get defined by raising money and getting your name out there. And so we made a determination that all I would have had to have done is raise money nonstop, and still a billionaire and a multimillionaire would have been able to define me in probably a way that I wouldn't have wanted to be defined before I would have had the money to define myself. So that's the problem with money as well.
Challenge. And in my case, I ran in a primary and I raised about $4.5 million, but a person named Mike Braun, who's about to be the next governor in Indiana, spent about $7 million of his own money in that primary, later spent about another $7 to win in the fall race. And then the challenge, I think, with like the Act Blue or the Republican side now, I mean, like it just is what it is in the sense that one can be encouraged that there's a lot of low-dollar donors coming into the race, but candidly, almost all of that is highly partisan folks that are more or less giving to the team rather than in a discerning way giving to this candidate or that candidate that I particularly like. In fact, if you've ever gone on one of those sites, as soon as you try to give to one person, they'll invite you to give to like 5 other people. That's what part of the trick of how this works, right? And they're hoping you'll put $5 here, $5 here, $5 there. Look, do I wish and hope it could be different? Yeah, I do think social media, for example, is something that gives the ability. AOC is a Democratic version. I wish I had there've been a few folks that have kind of come up grassroots, the same on the Republican side, where in races where there's not a lot of money being spent, you'll find some folks who kind of come up through, but the challenge is frankly, once you get to that kind of 7-figure spend, it's awfully hard with just phone calls and social media to overcome it.
A question for the audience. So how do you think members of Congress raise their money? What do you picture members of Congress, how they raise their money when they're having to run for, let's say, their first reelect? On the phone? Okay. Is that, anybody else think it's just on the phone?
Well, I've heard that there's a bank of phones someplace hidden in the Capitol building.
A bank of phones hidden is what he just said. So here's the thing. So I told you I ran the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. We have we call it a call time room. And it is a room where you've got phone, and when I first started, it was still landlines. But you have phone, like little cubby hole after cubby hole after cubby hole after cubby hole. It is on, like when you're ending near the end of the quarter, you have to report every quarter, it is packed. And if you cannot figure out how you tune other people out and how you stay on task, it's a crazy environment.
It's not on the Capitol grounds.
No, it's not. It's actually at the Democratic National Committee office. And it's only a few blocks from the House office buildings. And you could talk about how you do it on the Republican side. But you make calls. You could be between, you might start your morning in your office, and then you cannot make fundraising calls from the Capitol or from your office. That is against the law. So you have to go to this political environment. But you're exactly right. It's not hidden away. It's not really even a secret. But that is, you spend hour after hour after hour making those phone calls. And if you've ever gotten one, some people are pretty good at it. Some people, when I get calls from people asking for money, I just make them cut to the chase. I'm like, are you calling for money? And just, and then I'll say, how's your polling? How are your fundraising dollars? Because that's all part of how you figure out, is somebody going to be viable in the end. And so I'll get kind of those touch points that are important for me to make a determination whether I'm going to give. I will ask, are you on the Red to Blue program? You know what the Red to Blue program is? That's where, and you can, again, talk about what the Republican version is, but the Red to Blue is if you are a Democrat running against a sitting Republican and it's in a district that the Democratic Party thinks you can win, you are on a Red to Blue list. That gives you credentials, and like the big donors will give you money because you're on that list. If you're on the frontline list, that means you're an incumbent Democrat, but you're in a tough race and you don't have to pay dues to the party, and you have other people, your colleagues, who will help raise money for you.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff plays into this fundraising.
So Republicans would have different names, but same basic committees. What I would say is there's sort of 3 categories of people that would fall into that kind of level of fundraising. So you would have the 50 to 70 seats that are in any way legitimately competitive. Probably 30 to 50 that would be considered pretty highly competitive. And those folks, frankly, are going to spend a couple dozen hours a week, particularly in key times, raising money. You would have someone like when I was running for the U.S. Senate, even though I was a sitting member, that required me to sort of buckle down in that way. And so I was spending a couple dozen hours a week raising money as I raised the $4.5 million that I talked to you about in my race. Then you would have sort of leadership folks, almost, anybody you see in leadership, and that would be everything from sort of Sherry's job where you were doing the campaign committee to the speaker, leader, whip, like those sort of jobs. It's expanded a little to some of the other committee chairs. The only real difference with the amount of time they would spend is the zeros they would be asking for. So they're not making calls for $5,000, they're making calls for 50 or significantly more than that, of course. But you don't do those jobs without spending a lot of time raising money. And then, of course, in those jobs, you're also running around the country and appearing in 30 states to go to the contested races and make friends, but also work to build the party. So the reality is money is obviously a big part of it. Yes, ma'am? So the question is, who puts your list together for calling? So it is a combination of your own, so who would be, your sort of friends and family from out in the district. I represented a 19-county district. So I more or less had folks in every county that were sort of my lead people. And I did a lot more through events, honestly, than just direct calls when it was my time in Congress. And then, of course, the caucus itself would give you a list of people who are identified as national donors. That's why if anybody in here has ever bothered to, if you've written a $500 or $1,000 check to anyone for Congress, there's probably a good chance you've been contacted by dozens of your friends or that you've never heard of from around the country.
Yeah, once you write that first check, you are on a list. Exactly. And it's really kind of a prospecting list where you'll have other candidates who will take a look at, oh, well, who gave to Luke Messer? Well, I'm kind of a Republican like Luke, but I'm in Ohio instead of Indiana. But I feel like I'm the kind of Republican that Luke is, so I'm going to look at his donor list. So that kind of thing is done. But we, like our methodology is kind of like a target, all right? So you start with your inner circle. Who are the people who are on your holiday list, who you're going to send Christmas cards to or your holiday cards to? And that is like when you're first running, you go to the people who are those close, the people who you like, who know you. When you call them, you don't have to say, this is Sherry Bustos. Sherry who? Bustos. Sherry Truth Toes? These are the people who know you. So you start there, and that's how you go into these races. And then, if you go back to your very first race, that's what you start doing. And then you go like, what's that next list? People who maybe you went to college with, but you haven't kept in touch with. But you can call them and let them know what you're doing, kind of a little bit farther out. And then that other circle, or who are those groups who are going to like you? In my case, I was a woman. I was the first woman who was ever elected to my district. And so like people who are like women type causes and that sort of thing. So those would be the groups. If you're good on environmental issues, who are those environmental groups? If you're good on ag issues, who are the ag groups? So that outer circle, it's like, who are the folks who would want to see you elected? And then you got to call, and you really have to get over your uncomfortableness with asking for money for yourself.
Yeah, if you want to do it. And sure.
About the telephone calls, is that archaic yet? I mean, I never answer my cell phone unless I know who it is.
You leave a lot of voice messages.
Yeah.
And how good are you at leaving voice messages without it getting, like when you get the transcription, can you get to the point, and are you going to say something that's going to lead to that person calling you back? You follow up with emails. So you have a team, and every call is followed up with an email if you have the email address. And you don't always have all of that. But your finance team researches all of that. For every call that I made, and Luke, again, you can talk about how you did it, but we had a call sheet. So it would say, Mary Smith, this is where Mary lives, this is Mary's partner, and then there'd be some bio information. Mary's got a dog and a cat, played college tennis, and the last time you talked to Mary, she told you to give her a call back after you raised X amount of dollars and your polling looked better. So that next call would be, hey Mary, guess what? My polling's improved 10 points, and I outraised my opponent, and everything's looking good. Really hoping you can help me. And then the best practice is you ask for a specific amount of money. How do you know what money to ask for? You look at prior giving. Does this person have a history of giving $500, $100, $10? If it's $10, frankly, you're probably not going to get the call. But if you've got higher donor amounts, the caller, the member of Congress or the candidate would look at that trending. And if you've given to, say, 5 people, you've given $1,000 to each of them, you're going to get asked for $1,000.
But candidly, it becomes its own technique. And I was not, I would often get on the phone, because in my first couple of cycles, I wasn't running for the Senate, and I wasn't in the kind of competitive seat Sherry was, and I didn't have to raise $4 million. So I would, sometimes have a 10-minute conversation and then not really make a direct ask to someone, which is not very effective. You know what I mean? It may be effective as far as they think you're a nice person or whatever, but it's not effective in your ultimate goal. But now here's what I would say too. I don't want it to all seem so nefarious. because what happens is you develop like a community of people who are all bought in and part of your effort. So some of the national stuff can be pretty not very personal. You know, if you're calling somebody in Idaho who just writes checks, they're probably not going to become your best friend. But I would have, you know, 3 dozen people in this town and 2 dozen people in that town and 5, you know, some places, some of the larger towns, maybe 50, 60 people who every year we would have an event in their community and they'd come and it'd be hugs and it's great to see you. And frankly, they all were supporting me because they believed in what I stood for and they thought that I was a decent human in a place where they didn't think there were that many decent humans, right? Or whatever their opinion was. And so it does, and it becomes in its own way a kind of like, I mean, I've seen this, people who are trying to become a professional golfer and people that are willing to help them do it, right? It's almost, there is some of that. One of the questions that they added for us that's worth talking about a little bit is, so, okay, that we're kind of telling you what's it like in the big congressional districts, what's it like if you're running for Senate, obviously presidential even more, but is it that way in every race? And I would say, like they asked, what's the numbers for race to race? I mean, today, if you want to run for Congress, I tell somebody, you've got to figure out how you're going to raise at least 7 figures because you have to count on there being someone wealthy who's going to write a check of their own, right? If you're going to run for state legislature or Senate, it's probably more like 50, 60, 70 that you have to be able to compete in that first
Barbara, what do you have
primary?
to raise for the state legislature here if you're in a race?
If we're talking about Johnson County, which is our largest county,
Yeah.
then maybe you're anywhere between 60 and 100,000.
Okay, yeah, so
But if you're
big
on kind
difference.
of local, we can do it for 40, 50.
And does your party raise money for you? Like your leadership raise money for the rank and file running?
I'm one of those people that have to raise money for everybody.
For the rank and file?
Yes, for
Yeah,
the rank and
yeah.
file. If you're in leadership, that's part of your role, is
Yes.
to make sure
Yeah,
you
so that's
do
the other
that.
thing. Leadership is expected to do that for its
But
members.
wouldn't you say, Barbara, like if you're running in a primary, you're going to have to be able to raise significant money?
Yes,
be
because
able to win.
depending on where you're running, the primary may be the only race you have. So
Yeah.
you have to make sure you put it all in that one, and then therefore, you don't have a general and you're already elected.
Yeah.
But if you have both, that's where the money, that's where
Yeah.
it really doubles up
Yeah,
on you.
gotcha. We want 2 more questions on campaigns, and then we'll move to mobilizing.
Let's do it.
So we're kind of staying, 'cause, by the way, here are our topics. We got campaign finance, what we're talking about now, mobilizing support, so grassroots organizing, campaign experience, and then kind of exciting races that we're seeing out there. So, and then, but again, ask us questions as we're going along, but those are our 4 topics.
And you know
And
what?
sir, you had a question?
I will say to the team, we didn't bring our phones up here, and so I don't know that we have the time. So
Yeah, I
you
know.
may help,
So
you may help
know
move
what?
us along, okay?
Braden and you
Yeah.
guys, just make sure that we're sticking to our timelines, okay?
Okay.
All right, sir, you had a question?
Well, no, I wanted to say, I know someone who was going to run for governor of state of Kansas, and he was told by the Democratic Party that as a initial amount of money he needed to bring to the table was $5 million.
Yeah, but I think for a statewide race of that for a statewide race of that consequence, I think it's closer to 5.
And it would be much more than that in a highly populated state like Illinois.
Yeah.
Again, that's why having a billionaire as our governor, it's like he on day one can self-fund.
But candidly, even in a city council race, you're going to have to be able to raise a few $1,000s to have yard signs. And now I will say this, I think city council, state legislative races, going door to door, making direct phone calls to people, it matters a lot and can be the difference in winning a race. I always say Congress is like the lowest level local office, but probably, or the highest level local office, but probably the lowest level higher office in the sense that, look, I'm not telling you going door to door can't matter in a congressional race, but it's pretty tough unless you're.
Yeah, I mean, our districts are about 700,000 people each.
Yeah.
So compare that. Barbara, what's a state legislative district? How many people?
You're 66,000
Yeah.
if you're a senator and 24 if you're in the House.
Yeah, so 24,000 versus 700-some thousand. Any other finance questions before we, you two, and then we'll move on to grassroots organizing, mobilizing.
Do the Republicans have the phone bank like the Democrats
They do. Yep.
It's in a separate place.
Yeah. Now, I have to tell you, I never really went there very much. I would just grab a cell phone and go sit outside someplace or sit on my porch or something like that. But yeah, they do have it.
Sir?
So you said that one of the unintended consequences could be of getting money out of politics would be that it benefits the wealthy and celebrities. But at the same time, wouldn't that force representatives to focus more on local fundraising, thereby making them more beholden to their constituents?
Well, it depends on what you mean by getting money out of fundraising. I mean, what I was trying to say is this, is that if you capped how much someone could spend for Congress, or you capped how much someone could spend for a state legislative race, your challenge is let's say, well, I'll fix it. We'll just make sure no one can spend more than $50,000 or no one can spend more than $200,000 to run for Congress. Well, if somebody spent the last 20 years running automobile ads for their car lot, or if somebody was Danny Manning, who played for Kansas, or, my community now, Caitlin Clark's pretty popular, right? Or the Supreme Court has said you can't tell wealthy people that they can't spend their money to run. So almost any view of the law right now would be if you capped it at 200, the wealthy person could then go spend 2 million, whereas at least now in the current environment, I have a chance to compete with that person who could spend their own 2 million, because I could at least in theory go raise the 2 million. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess the question is, but in addition to that consequence, would it also make them more beholden to their constituents, because you're getting rid of the big donations and I guess the super PACs? So wouldn't it have both of those effects?
Well, no, because that celebrity would have been elected because of their celebrity, not because of their constituents. You know what I'm saying? Or the wealthy person because of their money. Yeah. But happy to talk about it afterwards, too.
All right, mobilizing. Luke, I'm going to kick this off and ask you.
Okay.
So how important is it for grassroots outreach in the campaigns that you ran? And what methods did you find most effective in mobilizing your support?
I mean, I'll be interested to hear what Sherry has to say, because she was in a very competitive set of fall campaigns in that way. I think it matters a lot. I think most of the techniques are like as old-fashioned as they've probably been for 200 years. I think it comes down to the fact that particularly in a world where we are all so cynical about information and what we hear from others, the best way to persuade someone is to have someone they actually trust and think their judgment is sensible to tell them why they're willing to vote differently. One of the reasons why you don't see as much of it as you might is because it's really expensive and hard to do, right? Like, one human being can only talk to so many people, right? So you have to hire all kinds of human beings to talk to those people and organize them. And I sort of believe, and this we'll get to the race later, that if you see an outcome in the fall election that doesn't look like what you're seeing in polling, for example, it may well be this. It's that there's something underneath it where communities of people are talking to each other that has really pushed the outcome in one direction or the other.
Well, and when you look at your support, right now we're down to the last 6 days. You know what's really, really important right now is the getting out the vote. So, and we'll get to, and I don't know if you guys are going to be bold enough to share your predictions with us on what's going to happen next week, but I'd love to hear it. But reportedly, the Harris campaign has an amazing, what's called a ground game, getting out the vote and just making sure that people are registered. I mean, now you've got Elon Musk giving, $1 million for, and I don't know if that's going to be ruled to be legal or not legal. It seems very odd to me. But it is, like, your get out the vote effort is incredibly, incredibly important. So I have this campaign training school that I started after the 2016 cycle. And I called it Build the Bench. And my thought was, after the 2016 cycle, I had run recruitment. I was vice chair of recruitment, recruiting candidates all over the country to run for office. And in that 2016 cycle, it was really, really hard to recruit in 3 categories. And that was young people. Again, this was 2016. 2018 was very different for Democrats, but 2016, it was really hard to recruit young people, it was harder to recruit women, and it was hard to recruit people of color. And I recognize that because I was on so many different recruitment calls and thought, you know, I want to train people on how to run and how to win, and I want to focus on those categories so we build our bench. And so the 4 things that we focus on that is grassroots organizing, which we're talking about right now, fundraising, messaging, and your digital strategy. And we're going to talk a little bit about digital work and advertising and that sort of thing too. But that said, having a good ground game is incredibly important. And it means registering people when it's still open to register people, but registering the people that you think then will vote for you, and then your get out the vote effort, and then inspiring people to get involved. You, like on Saturdays, you have parties, you bring in donuts or pizza or whatever it is, and you get people all fired up. You get somebody from your party who's really good at getting people fired up, and then you go out and you do knock doors. You do what's called lit drops, which is dropping your literature at different doors. But that is really what the grassroots type of work is about, motivating people to want to vote for you and to want to support you, to want to volunteer on your race. And all of that is part of it.
And conventional wisdom is that you're probably not going to move a race 15 points with that kind of like grassroots effort, but you could move it a couple points, and you certainly in a race where someone wins by 1,000 votes, I mean, you know, it could be the difference in 1,000 votes one direction or another, that's for sure. So I do believe that as you see what unfolds over the course of the next week through the next election, questions like this about did the grassroots effort of one team or another make a difference? You know, it's interesting, and wherever you fall on Trump, he is someone who has very much defied conventional wisdom in this regard. You know, his deal, like normally the grassroots and the get out matters even the most in primaries, right? Because it's fewer people voting. So if you have an ability to turn out people in a relatively, under turnout pool, then you make a difference. He went and had a big rally and people would show up, right? And so this is now sort of round 3 of this test in 16, and there were some questions about whether Hillary should have campaigned in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and but in general, that one he won. The last one, of course, he didn't, and this one we'll see again. I think by most measures, and I'm sure some person on the Trump turnout team might have a different opinion, but in general, I think the conventional wisdom is that Kamala's turnout operation is much more robust. So we'll see.
So online advertising, television advertising, do they work? Why do candidates use them? Is what's changing along those lines? And then the other thing, and I would be curious as to what the folks out here think, attack ads, the negatives, do they work, do they not work? But let me throw it out to you first, Luke.
So let's take them in order. Yeah. So how many of you read a newspaper every morning? How many of you read a physical newspaper every morning? How many of you watch the morning news? Okay. And all of us just turned out here to something at the Dole Institute, right? Like we're pretty serious about our background in news. Most studies now tell you, and I say, ask your friends and neighbors, most folks get their news through their social media feed, right?
Raise your hand if that's how you get most of your news, through your social media feed.
Right.
So look at all the young people. Raise your hand high if you get through your social media. So look around, everybody. It is like all of the young people.
Yeah.
It's all of the young people.
And I have sort of a hybrid way of that. I have sort of emails that come to me, and I sort of get these emails, and I'll flip through it fast. And because I'm a strange person in modern America, I like have emails from both sides, and I get all kinds of information from both sides to kind of get a sense of where they're both coming from. But I think it matters a whole lot because for most folks, this is how they're getting news. And then, of course, if I'm trying to remember what the name of that documentary was, but we've all sort of learned, right? The problem with these little boxes is they feed us what we want to hear, right? So if you clicked on something that was maybe misinformation, you can count on getting 10 more things with that same misinformation.
I heard a good term. It was called that you get affirmation, not information. You know, because it's just affirming what you already believe, depending on what you've been searching for. And I think that's what's happening.
And when we started, you would have maybe, like, people would have said, social media, and you're not doing that. Maybe buy some emails. I think now, I mean, look, there's campaigns that would spend a quarter of their money on that.
That's changed a lot. In the time that we were in office, that has changed tremendously. All of these different firms that the campaigns hire, they all have to be well versed on this. And have you heard the term geofencing? Has anybody heard that term? It is where you can have ads or messaging that just go to it could be a neighborhood. It could be around an event. It could be like right here, right now. Somebody knows that the Dole Institute's got this program going on, and they probably are going to make the assumption that you're all voters, and they can send messages to your phone, or when you're looking at something, the ads that would come up could be geofenced for just this area type of thing. It's expensive, but campaigns can use it very effectively now.
And by the way, lobbyists use it. Here's how. If there's a big debate going on at the State House, they can like draw a fence around the State House and basically make sure that everyone sees these ads, which of course feels like that everyone in the state must be seeing these ads, but you know, often it's in that narrower window. And then I think, you know, that's sort of one of the more fascinating parts, by the way, of this campaign. I can't remember if we talked about this last time that we were here, but I have a colleague of mine, in fairness to her, I won't quote who she is specifically, but she was involved in a leadership role in the Republican Party, and she met with Donald Trump in New York in 2013, and he was showing her all these things he was doing with Twitter, how cool Twitter was, and she was like, Twitter, what's that? I don't know, right? And then by the time he went through the 2016 campaign, he was and then of course some of the young folks that we've talked to mentioned, he was very aggressive, has been in this cycle in podcasts and the like. Kamala has been, you know, her team has, and I'm not hip enough to know what the 12-second videos are and all, maybe even it's 5-second videos or whatever, but her campaign, you know, I've read about how they're trying to use the imagery and campaigns of the moment. And, you know, by the way, there was a time that mail was radical and new, right? When it came to campaigns. So we
used them early on in our campaign.
This is what people have done through the history of the Republic, right?
Yeah,
I mean, whether it was
totally.
newspapers at the beginning, you message through the mediums that are there and being used.
So attack ads, do they work? No? Do you know why campaigns use them? Because they work. They do. I mean, part of it is like the idea is that you build up your candidate of choice, you know, like if it's a two-person race, the person who wants to win, you always try to build up their profile. I mean, you put out the best parts about them, if they've passed major legislation, or if they're running the first time, if they got a good bio, you get all that out there. When I talked about being able to define myself, it's like introducing yourself to the voter. But attack ads work.
Yeah.
And I will tell you this, in my 5 congressional races, 2 of them, my opponents were so weak, I never ran any attack ads. My final race, I wasn't planning to run any attack ads. Y'all do, we do opposition research. You know about that? That's another thing you do in campaigns. So you know the bad stuff about your opponent. Then you figure out, are you going to use it or you're not going to use it? And then what happened with me in my last race, I ended up winning by 4 points, which was the narrowest win that I had out of all my races. But as my numbers were going down, because this, again, Trump won my congressional district, and so what was happening is my opponent was riding kind of on his coattails, and as his numbers were improving, her numbers were improving, my numbers were going down. We made a decision to run attack ads because I wanted the people in our congressional district to know what she was about, and we had more money than she did. That's where money is important too in a race.
Well, so I was going to say quick response. I think there are techniques that don't work that well anymore. I think grainy pictures don't work that well anymore. I think at one point, it used to really matter if you could quote the Indianapolis Star in an ad. I think it's irrelevant now. People don't have that same sort of respect for those kinds of, so it's really now, I think you see a lot more humor. And I think, one of the things you've seen, very prominent in the presidential campaign is quoting of people speaking themselves. Because I think there is it just hits different than it does when you're just trying to say in a grainy ad that somebody has a certain point of view. Anyway, yeah.
I'm sure that they work, but I guess, particularly in this campaign, they've become so offensive that, they've turned me totally off. I used to be an independent, but I'm not sure I'll ever vote Republican again, just because of the ads I've seen in this cycle.
No, I think you can definitely cross a line. Absolutely. Now, our test in our campaign was always, it's got to be honest. I don't want anybody, I'm a former journalist. So, for me, it was like, we better not embellish. And I'm not talking about even just using an element of truth, but it better be truthful if we're going to do an attack ad. I agree, some of them are just so offensive. I think the best attack ad, I actually like to watch attack ads. I just like to, I know it's kind of like, you probably think, what a weirdo. But like just from a political science perspective, they just are, they're of interest to me. In our local congressional race, the challenger is a retired judge. And he went to a church during the campaign, and from the front of the church, and this was all videotaped because it was a videotaped, it was streamed, this church service, he talked about how when a decision, when a court case was in front of him and he had to go make a decision, that he would go back to the judge's chambers and put the case on the floor and lie on it and pray over it. And he's saying this. And so the attack ad gets a guy in a judge's robe who looks almost exactly like this guy running, shoots it kind of from the side so you can't see his face, shows him walking down this hallway, kind of a darkened hallway, going into an office that's all this dark wood, putting the case on the floor, lying on it, and praying. And I'm just like, when I saw that, I'm like, what you don't want is a judge to make his decisions like that. At least I don't want a judge to make a decision like that. And I just think it was so effective. I don't think that's offensive. It shows him the video of him saying this, and this is the video, showing that. But I agree, some are so over the top.
And it's hard now. I knew coming in here, look, as I said to you before, I'm no great defender of either candidate in the race, and we're at a kind of an emotional time where everybody has very strong opinions about it, so it's a hard time to talk about it. But I will say this, we're in an academic setting where one ought to be able with civility to talk with each other through things. What's changed is, I always held to the standard Sherry described. In my primary, really the 3 or 4 big punches in our race, they were all completely false. But if you have twice as much money, you define it now. Mm-hmm. There used to be referees. It used to be the media would say, well, you know what, that's not true. That's not what happened. I'll take one of the more innocuous ones. Okay, I was one of Mitch Daniels' kind of lead lieutenants when he was governor. We proudly cut taxes. And, but it was one of those deals where you have a package of things that cut taxes, and then there's a few taxes that go up as you move the whole thing together. But he was elected by landslide, touting and someone in the primary said, I raised taxes on something I did with Daniels. And, it would have been sacrilegious to have said that 10 years before. And at different era, a media person would have said, well, you can't say that as a Republican about somebody else. But in that moment, you can't do that. And I'm not even saying that was the most important issue. It's just that's changed. People getting most of what they know now by whoever has the best ad. And then I would just say, kind of in line with what Sherry just described, look, I think if folks see an outcome they don't like in a week, you need to look at some of these ads that have been Kamala in person and no real response to it. You know what I mean? And I think it's just in a world where we don't know what to trust, people can at least kind of trust their eyes, you know, and I think it's been a real factor.
All right. Do we want to talk about rallies, whether they make a difference? No? Yeah? Yes or no?
How much time do we have? What time is it?
You
And
guys
so
have
we
not
have,
kept
so
track
we
of our
have 30
time for
minutes,
us.
20, or do we have four?
Yeah,
are
how
we going
long
to
does this
5:15?
go? Okay.
Yeah, so we got 25 minutes.
We have 25 minutes. All right. Just real quickly on rallies. You know, we always did them, even at the congressional level, until COVID. And when COVID hit, were you running that year?
I was not.
Okay. Democrats stopped them because our lawyers were saying, you're going to make people sick. It's irresponsible. We didn't even go door to door. And that was when I was running the political arm of House Democrats, and our lawyers said, you can't go door to door, you can't do your rallies. Man, I thought it was a killer. The Republicans kept doing it. They kept doing it. And so, again, we held on to the majority, but we didn't pick up the seats that we thought we were going to be able to pick up. And you kind of think, how much did that play into it? Keep in mind that election cycle, how that was just such an odd election cycle. You had COVID, you had George Floyd, you had the protests. I mean, it was just a very unusual cycle. But like, I just always ask, like, we didn't do rallies, they did. Now you're, you know, fast forward to the presidential now. Does it matter to you that Beyonce did this event for Kamala in Texas? Does that matter to you? I'm wondering about the young people. So Bad Bunny, anybody, raise your hand if you have gray hair and you know who Bad Bunny is. Wow, good for you. I didn't know anything about him, but so do those, you know, those things matter at these rallies? I think it's more if you say something that's shocking at the rallies that then gets amplified. Like the so-called comedian. How can you call yourself a comedian when you're like saying such horrible things that are zero funny? But that said, I think, and Luke, please weigh in here,
I think they matter differently. I think they're, you know, like so many of these other topics, what it means at the presidential level is different than what it means at a local level. I think in some ways, you know, I would have two big events a year, a Christmas event that was about 150 people, and like a big picnic in my district every year that was about 500 people. And I think that mattered a lot because it was about connecting sort of the family across the district. And then those were my champions who were out in communities. And, you know, by the way, in that race that I talked to you about where I was outspent like 3-1, I won every county in my district by 2/3 margin. You know what I mean? So why? Because of sort of the personal relationships you build. I think they matter in the presidential, and I think in this case, it's probably a little bit net neutral in that they're like self-affirming. So I think it matters because the pictures tell you it's okay, right? Like, so I'm for, you know, I'm not going to say what I'm for, okay? So, but, you know, wherever you are for your candidate, if you see on TV and you see thousands of other people cheering them on, it sort of tells you, oh, okay, this is not insane. This kind of makes sense. And I think you've got in this race that on both sides, right? You've got robust turnouts and rallies on both sides, so it's not been a differentiator in a way I think it's been in a few other races.
I would like to comment on what you said about the celebrities.
Yeah.
All right, it depends on who the celebrity is and what your purpose is for that particular celebrity.
So give us an example, what you mean.
All right, what did Beyonce say? I am not here as a celebrity. I am not here as an entertainer. I'm here as a mother. So, therefore, she's making the distinction that she has a private life and she is a mother. So she has concerns. Yes, you're going to see her as an entertainer, but she came as a mother. So it depends on what your purpose is and what specifically you're supposed to be addressing. That's when I think people pay attention to it because, ooh, I want to go and see that person. Now, if you're trying to bring people in, that's why you do that. But
Yeah, I mean, how many people showed up at that 25,000, 30,000 people?
yeah, and so you think about, or what, last night, 70,000, 75,000. So it just depends on what it is. But what I have understood, people have said about celebrities, is they are regular people too. And we only see them as celebrities.
Well, and my friend Barbara, who we became friends last time I was here, I had a chance to have lunch and spend time, so I have great admiration for her. I would say this, because again, I'm here in the Republican role and sort of trying to help folks understand, I think, the way that side sees it. I have to tell you that I think all of it, from a kind of typical Republican out in rural or even sort of suburban America, it just feels like, yep, there we go again. They're all lining up against us. They always do. It's always 90 the other way. So I think it may be effective for turnout among folks who like the, you know, there are certainly Taylor Swift fans that might not otherwise vote, that will care that she cares. But I think, you know, in the world of politics, we always, there's things we do that have their intended consequences, and there's things we do that sort of have an unintended consequence. And I think something about all of this makes it all seem really normal. You get what I mean by that? Yeah, it just feels like, yeah, those liberals, they all don't like us. That's how it always is.
Well,
You know, that's why I think the big mistake, like I guess I'm going to jump right into this one, but I do believe it, is I think, you know, I get it from a base turnout perspective, but I think like calling Trump a fascist, and I think it's been net negative. And I have a lot of respect for General Kelly, and I've spent some time with him personally, and respect his opinion a lot, and his opinion matters to me.
Why do you think it's a net negative?
Because I can show you, and I've seen the meme, I can show you the last 8 Republicans who ran that the liberals all called fascists. So it's like George W. was a fascist. You know, people said it, you know. They did, though. I mean, that's the thing, like, put on your perspective, I mean, that was what was said about Reagan. Like, it's what's been said over and over, so it just rings to people like, and again, I will tell you, I once ran in a race that I lost by 2,000 votes to Dan probably won 15 elections, okay? And one of the things I told our team is we have to understand that the people that are in this district, they voted for the person we're trying to beat 30 times in a primary and in a general election. So we're going to have to get our mind around the psychology of not telling these people they were idiots for voting for him for 30 times, because there's a pretty good chance they're not going to buy that they were idiots for voting for him 30 times, right? And so again, I think all of this rings, I think what's been missed, and I mean, again, that doesn't mean she's not going to win. I think she may, but I think what's been missed in this is like, they haven't found a way to tell those people who voted for him before that, like, you're not an idiot for doing that. You're not un-American, right? And when you say things like that, it's like these people that vote, so I voted for a fascist twice?
You had a question?
Well, I mean, I'm telling you, and I love my...
So he has a question, and he has a question.
Yeah.
The celebrity thing, like with the Beyonce at the rally and stuff, isn't that a tactic that's used mostly to attract the moderates? Because you said that, like, for what's it called, the right-wing base, that just makes them think, oh, they're doing this again, they're lining up against us. But isn't that also said on the other side when when Republicans also use celebrities like Hogan or Kid Rock, because it's just to be expected at that point? So isn't the celebrity the benefit of getting moderates to kind of pay more attention, because the people who are already decided?
Well, a couple things. One, remember, I didn't say what I think. I'm just telling you like what I hear when I talk to people, and I think the way they respond. I think you are right in saying that often those celebrities are used to try to turn out, I wouldn't necessarily say moderate, but someone who just doesn't turn out. So they're trying to get somebody who doesn't typically vote, but who might be inclined your way to do it. And I'm not even criticizing it like I mean, again, everybody uses whatever they have to use. I'm just telling you, I think several of these things that have unfolded in the last month have just, to the base of just kind of what you would consider normal Republican, has just kind of rang up like, okay, I get it, here's the song sheet. And I don't think it had to be that way, by the way. I think there was an argument to be made that didn't have to be that, but it's the way it's evolved. By the way, as Sherry can tell you in campaigns, one thing everybody would tell you is nuance is hard, man. Like that's why you don't see much of it, right? So I'm not saying it's easy. Nuance is hard.
Well, look what happened after Taylor Swift sent out her Instagram post. You had thousands of people who registered to vote, and that was her message, vote. So, look, I certainly wouldn't have turned down any of those endorsements or those events. I would never have said to Beyonce, oh, no, don't come to my rally.
I wouldn't have said, Beyonce, don't come for my rally. I'd love it.
Yeah, so, no, I think, we all like those. It's like endorsements. We like those because they give you some credibility. They bring their supporters to your point about when you see a lot of people at a rally, you're like, oh, okay, that's okay. It's okay to be supportive. And it's kind of like that affirmation.
What time is it?
He had a question, and then we want to just open it up for dialogue. Do we want to make predictions, too? We're going to be here. What's our date that we're returning, Sarah? November 15th? 13th. So we'll be back after the election. So anybody who wants to come here, we can see if our predictions are right or wrong or whatever. So, sir, what's your question?
I think in regards to your comments on the Trump supporters and the fascism, I think when the Kamala campaign uses that rhetoric, it reinforces their vote for Trump. It truly does, because that's what they are voting for, that, and for his policies around that type of government.
Well, I wouldn't accept that premise. I understand what you're saying. I don't agree.
But I think where it does help is for that person that maybe hasn't voted in a presidential election the last time or the time before that maybe they're like, well, maybe I really should go vote this time. Yeah.
Well, look, we got 12 minutes. I don't want to occupy it all with that. I will say this. I think if you looked at the convention, you saw, I think, better approaches. I think, and I think through most of the campaign, her approach was more like what you heard from Barack Obama in the convention, more like what you heard from Clinton in the convention. I think it was a base decision. I think they decided that argument was really important to turn out their base, because their base does believe that. I think they've reinforced on the other side. I do have to say this because, look, I've been pretty clear that I'm not, there's plenty that I could criticize about President Trump, and you can Google it. I pretty much got beat in part because I had things to say about President Trump that weren't perfect, even though I was supportive. Most Republicans aren't looking for a fascist state. I just don't agree with that. And so this idea that somehow that turns on Republicans, that's not right. What they think is, base. The man's going to get 49% of the vote, and I don't accept the premise that a very high percentage of that 49 agrees with that point of view. I just don't. And frankly, I think, and I'm not going to stand up here and be a carping ninny. I promised myself I wouldn't, but I will say this, I hated my answer last time I was here when I said we need more civility and truth, and somebody said, how do we do that? And I kind of fumbled around, and the reality is we all have to practice it. That's the answer. We can't change the world, but we can change how we behave. And I think this idea that half of America is bad, that's just not right, And so, we're in the midst of a debate, and I think so let's get to predictions so we can fade into that. Well, here's what I think.
Well, hold on a second, just to, he has said that he would like to suspend the Constitution. I really do think that there are so many alarming statements that have come out of his mouth. And then if you want to talk about Project 2025, or if you want to talk about this other group that Linda McMahon's running, that talk about executive orders that'll be ready on day one, it is scary stuff. So I guess part of what I would say about the fascist, I wouldn't use necessarily that word, because I'm guessing there's a certain percentage of Americans who don't know really what does it mean, what is fascism. I wouldn't use those words, but I think reinforcing some of the scariest things that he has said, the deportation of millions of people right off the bat, how does that look? And he has not answered that, and I know there have been journalists who have tried to ask him about that, but how does it look? Do you knock on their doors in the middle of the night? And what happens if they're married to an American citizen and they have children who, I mean, I'm just like, how does this whole thing play out? So
we may have to go an extra 10 minutes or so if we can, just so we have enough time. But here's my response. Like, remember, you've not heard me say what I think. I'm telling you how this sounds to other folks. Here's what I hear, and then I want to get more to your specific point about I think how it could have been handled differently, is folks say to me, okay, so we're going to become like Stalinist state when he's elected. I mean, he was elected for 4 years and it didn't happen. He's been around here for 4 years and he wasn't like trying to, he wasn't beating on the White House door or had people with guns. So it just makes it easy for these folks to dismiss it. I mean, because that's what I hear is like, come on. I mean, that just didn't happen. Now, I'm not telling you my own fears. I'm telling you that's what you hear from folks. Now, look, I mean, I can hear from the groans and whatever. It's not going to be a close election in this room, okay? I'm not suggesting for folks that are already on one side of it, it's all pretty compelling. That's why I think it's a base turnout maneuver. I would just suggest to what Sherry said, I mean, I'm pretty sure Trump talks for an hour and 45 minutes at almost every rally he gives. I suspect there were some times you could have taken his words and shown people what he said and what his opinions were, instead of putting a grainy image up and saying he's this or that. And I think, frankly, that's what's been done rather artfully on the other side, is taking issues and letting her say what she thinks about those things. And, look, I'm not making like a value judgment. I mean, Trump called her a communist before, and that was goofy. He said it too. But I just don't think it rang the same. I don't think it rang the same way. Here's what I really think, because I'm not even telling you, like, here's where I think I could be wrong, okay? But I think the challenge in polling is that it's like we're trying to look at a molecule with a magnifying glass. And what I mean by that is that the instrument is not precise enough to deal with what we have here, which is a razor-thin election, really pretty much across the country, and certainly in these swing areas, right? And so I think when you take that not precise enough instrument and you see it over and over and over again more or less look the same, then that tells me that we're making assumptions in that polling, and they're either going to be right or they're going to be wrong, right? Like, probably history tells us they won't be right to perfection, right? So it would not surprise me at all if this thing ends up being a 2 or 3 point. I don't think it's going to be a 10-point win on one side or the other, because the instrument's precise enough to tell us it's not going to be that, right? Because it does within 4%. But I think you may well see that, this fascism debate turned out people who never voted before because they cared about it and it made a difference. Or abortion played in certain ways in key states like they did 2 years ago, and people thought it was maybe different, but the turnout was different, right? We see these huge, it's like the gender gap is pretty strong both ways, right? You've got a strong men bias towards Trump and a strong female bias towards Kamala. And so if the women's turnout is significantly more than the men's turnout, right, that could change the election. And I think that at least in some of these swing areas, they're enough alike that, Wisconsin's not that different than Pennsylvania, is not that different than, what's our other swing state? Michigan.
Pennsylvania, Michigan.
Right? So I think you'll probably see those states look pretty similar, and that could swing the electoral vote one way or the other pretty significantly.
Okay, do you guys want to raise your hands on who's going to win?
You're not even going to give a prediction?
Yeah, no, I'll give a prediction.
Okay.
I'm curious as to what people, not who you're going to vote for. Yeah, yeah.
If this fellow wins in Nebraska, he says he's not going to caucus with either party. How could he possibly, the steam fitter?
I thought he said he was going to caucus with the Democrats.
No.
It turned out to be a mistake in one of the forms. Like one of the PACs mentioned it in one of the forms, and then the campaign said, no, it was a mistake. Like we.
Oh, so now he's saying he will not caucus with either. Oh, interesting.
So it would just change the math. So basically, the majority would be, well, two things. You would still have caucuses of, however many folks. So let's say there would be 99, 45 in one, and 44 in the, 50, 49. 50 and 49. Yeah, 50 and 49. But I think he would still either have to abstain from the leader vote or not. So eventually, you're going to have to vote for a leader one way or the other.
Well, and if it's split, here's the thing with that. Like, who is the chair of every committee is based on who's in the majority.
Yeah, that's what I read this morning.
So I feel like he has to make some decision on it. Is he going to win? I mean, it's.
I think not. But I think not after that. After that revelation, I think probably
yeah,
not.
that's interesting. That.
Yeah, that's legitimate.
I don't know really. That's kind of a dilemma.
And it's been interesting because this was, and we're all kind of learning about it, but one of the outside Democratic groups spent like tens of millions of dollars there, and the polling for the longest time, like the Republicans weren't even really playing, so they were kind of asleep at the switch a little bit. But it does seem like, as these revelations have come out in the last couple of days, that the polling may be sliding back.
What are the attack ads on him? What is, it's Fisher, right? Yeah. I'm just curious as to what the attack ads are. Okay, so here's my prediction. And we're all reading the same thing, and it's all, just a dead heat. I am going to say Kamala Harris will be president, that the Democrats will win back the majority in the House, and Republicans will take the majority in the Senate. That's my prediction. And it's really more based on, I have to think that the American public, the things that I just talked about suspending the Constitution, about deporting millions of people, about the fact that women's reproductive rights are, that is a very, very important issue for a lot of people, And the statements about, unless you're a young, why would an older woman care about this? It's like, really? It's that's So I think that, and I think again, I wouldn't word it as the fascist, I wouldn't be using that terminology, but I really do think that in the end, people, when they go into the voting booth, that will matter to Americans. So that's my prediction.
So now, because she was precise enough, I'll be a little more precise and also maybe a little more clear, because I'm not trying to hide anything. I've spent a lot of my last 6 years, I feel like I interpret Washington, D.C. to the rest of the country and interpret the rest of the country to Washington, D.C. And that just basically means I make everybody mad that I talk to, because neither side really wants to hear. Look, I'll be this blunt. I have a lot of concerns about President Trump. I'm not dismissing the concerns. General Kelly I have a lot of respect for. But here's what I think's going to happen unless there's something wrong in the polling, is I think that they had a chance to make this abnormal, and the whole debate came down pretty normal. And I think that there are a lot of folks in these swing communities where the value-based arguments that have been made without any refutation, and I sort of said this in a private room, but I have no problem saying it here, if you listen to what President Trump has had to say about abortion, he's been moderating, right? What he has said, now listen to what I'm saying though, folks have attacked on abortion. He has said, I voted for I supported those judges, but I support exceptions. I think it's state-based. I think states should decide how they handle it. Contrast that to how Kamala has responded to the transgender prisoner ad with crickets, with no moderation, no statement of, well, wait a minute, that's not exactly my position. And I'm telling you, to people that care about those things, they heard no statement helping them understand how something that is, by the way, it's a 75% issue across America. It's not, I mean, I'm talking about not by party, by general folks. And what they heard instead of any clarification was that Trump's a fascist, which to them just rings like, okay, like, so I would say this. I think there's a world, I think Trump wins those 3 states, and I'll be surprised
Which 3?
The 3 swing states in the middle of the country.
So Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania?
And I think he wins Georgia and probably North Carolina. And I think unless, I feel like you're in a situation that is essentially the reverse of 2016. And what I mean by that is this: a whole lot of folks went to the polls thinking that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and the polling surprised them. I would say unless the polling is surprising, if there's something in the polling that essentially is this, that most pollsters believe that they underpolled Trump's people the last couple cycles, so they've tried to make adjustments to that to make the thing more accurate. And if they're wrong in those adjustments and the turnout is different, then I think that Kamala could win. But I'll be surprised if Donald Trump's not the next president.
Okay, questions, comments?
Both of you in 2016 for the election.
I was shocked that Donald Trump won. I really was. I thought Hillary would win. Because again, there were just some absurd things that he had said back then from day one. And I just thought, you know, the Americans aren't going to want this guy. That said, the congressional district that I represented swung 17 points from Obama to Trump, the district that I represented. 17-point swing, that's huge. I could feel it on the ground changing. And what I said after that election is I understood people, I called them Trump triers, because he had never been in office, he was a celebrity, he wasn't a typical politician. I remember people saying, I like the way he talks. He just talks like a normal person. So I remember thinking, okay, you know what? People are going to try him. And then as it got closer and closer to 20 and he was running for re-election, I thought, there's no way he's going to win this race again, or the congressional district that I represented. And he did, and he won by a bigger margin in the district that I represented. And for me, it was just like, I don't get this. Now people who wanted to try him, now they could see what he was, and they voted for him by a bigger amount. And that was so disturbing to me. That was part of the reason, and that and being on the House floor on January 6th, it is why I'm like, you know what, I can probably do something else with my life.
And I would say I I thought Hillary would win. Donald Trump thought Hillary would win. I mean, I know people that were in the room.
Yeah.
If you've seen, people have seen the picture, but they all thought it was, they were, you know, surprised by what happened. But I really believe, like, look, back to this point, I know by saying this maybe it means that no one in the room will like me, but I think we all have to understand folks vote with the information that's before them. And there are arguments to be made, but I think that if you wake up on election day and it's not the outcome you want, and you convince yourself that your worst characterization of the other side is what the other side all voted for, I mean, there's no way that 49% of America, either way, supports your worst thoughts about it. It just isn't what it is. I mean, we have come down with a debate where the base of each party largely can say to themselves, hey, you know, I know what my team is, and my team's for my stuff, and so they're voting their team. And then this small universe of people in the middle are being persuaded based on whatever, you know, whatever happens to hit them. But I even think this is, it may, you know, we've spent all of our time thinking about like your one friend who's really undecided. And this may all be far more defined by which side's team turns out more. You get what I mean? Like whichever side is.
That ground game that we're talking about, it's incredibly important.
But have any of you tried this if you get a chance? if you have a friend who lives in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin or Arizona or North Carolina, ask them about it. Because I have had friends tell me, you know, I've been in a perfectly peaceful neighborhood for like the last 15 years. And all of a sudden now, like, I feel like I can't even talk to my neighbors because of how kind of hot it's all gotten.
Yeah. He and then he.
I just wanted to let you know we're 5 minutes over time.
All
Okay.
right.
Just real quick.
So should we wrap it up?
What's your predictions for the House and Senate, and who is likely to replace Mitch McConnell's leadership position?
So my guess would be Thune, if Republicans are in the majority, but I don't know that that's a guarantee. You know, I think the Senate's going to be awfully hard for the Democrats because they basically start, West Virginia's gone and Montana's almost there. So, but I do think, you know, Ella was mentioning earlier, you know, this kind of really kind of odd phenomenon we're seeing all across the country. Like state after state is getting closer. And yet it's not yet looking like that it's getting closer, but the blue states are staying blue and the red states are staying red, right? But you do have this kind of really fascinating circumstance in the Senate side where a bunch of these races are 2 and 3 points. And if turnout swings one way or another, you could find, you know, the Democrats won the majority, 4 years ago in the Senate, where they took like 5 straight 50% races and won them all and swung it. And you could have, if this
Trump's midterm.
Yeah,
it was Trump's midterm where Democrats, that's how we won the 2 in Georgia. And
yeah, and they were razor thin. So you could have this kind of strange situation if the turnout dynamic kind of leans one way or the other. You could have a pretty big majority on the Senate side.
No, that was 20. I'm sorry, that was 20 when we won the 2 Georgia ones, not the
that was in
midterm.
the
I was wrong on
presidential.
that. Yeah,
and there was strange things there. That's the other thing. If you made me predict something that'll make all of us unhappy, is I think when we're here in 2 weeks, there's going to be unresolved.
Which does happen, you know, routinely these days. It's not that that doesn't happen. There was a race in Iowa where there was a 6-vote difference, and they had to sort that out. Hakeem Jeffries from New York, Catherine Clark from Massachusetts, and Pete Aguilar from California will be the top 3 Democrats, whether Democrats win back the majority or not.
I think Mike Johnson stays as Speaker if Republicans win the majority. I think it gets more complicated if he doesn't. I would say interesting when we talked just privately about, I mean, quote Ms. Bustos, but I think both caucuses in the House side are relatively bullish that they can win, which is kind of just means it's really competitive.
Yeah.
And wrap up the program today, but if any of our audience would like to stay, we would encourage you to stay and discuss with our fellows afterward.
Did we get any questions online? Okay, all right. Well, so we should just end by saying thanks to the Dole Institute, and thanks to you guys for turning out, and thanks to the leadership.
Yeah, is there any campus media here? No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because there was last time, right? We had a story.
Is my microphone off? Is the camera off?
Uh-oh. No, it looks like.